Welcome to Daring to Suck. I'm your host, Grace Askew, a veteran musician, songwriter, recording artist, and road dog who has been living and breathing my craft for over 15 years. Each episode will dive deep into what it truly looks like to be a working artist, the good, the bad, and the ugly. Come roll along with me, tumbleweeds. Welcome y'all to episode 8 of season 1, where we are continuing to explore the artist journey. And actually, I want to end out this whole season with Patrick Ermlich. Just a little backstory. Patrick Ermlich is a lifelong artist guide, writer, creative director, business developer, and chief marketing officer of Gramophone Media in New York City, and a longtime inspiration to me in my own artist journey. I thought since that's the very theme of season 1, he'd be a great way to end things out. And I really want to explore Patrick's perspective and wisdom on guiding the artist's journey. And I really appreciate your time, Patrick.
It's awesome to be here. I've been looking forward to it. And we always had such a great rapport from day one and connected on the personal and emotional side of this work. So it's perfect type of podcast for me to be on.
Yeah, no, you're a perfect guest. And I clearly remember just being inspired by you from our very first conversation. And I would love for you to tell the story again of how you got to where you are and what your deeper why is. I believe it was about your father, who was an Episcopalian priest. Is that right? And it just...
Good memory. Yeah, good memory.
Yeah, I just was like, it was a very moving story. So I'd love for you to tell that story.
Sure. So I was born in upstate New York, like right in the middle of the state, in a small little hamlet in the middle of this real quiet valley. And my parents were both like real hyper creatives, and like my mother was real self-made and still is, and she was an opera singer and actress. So and my father was also a singer, and they both sang opera together. They both helped co-found this local opera company, which is a pretty big one now.
Amazing.
Globally. And so they were like very entrepreneurial. They started a bed and breakfast when I was real young. So I grew up in a business. Like I grew up in the hospitality business, essentially.
Wow.
But they were always doing things and creating things. And there was always musicians around the house and singers around the house. And my older brother was the drummer, more of a rock drummer. So I had a very musical, entrepreneurial upbringing. So it's not like a surprise that I built my own businesses and am in music. It's exactly where I was probably going to end up, no matter what.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of how I started. And then as I went to college in Boston, I went for music business, and I got most of the way through that program, and I was like, music business is just not for me.
Yeah.
And then I left. And
was that at Berklee College of Music, or?
No, that was not at Berklee. It was at Northeastern, right down the street from Berklee.
Okay.
So, but I spent a lot of time with Berklee people and over in the Berklee area. And I left there, and I was looking for something else, and I discovered an opportunity to learn and go to school for audio engineering and production. So I went to a music conservatory out in Arizona for that, and built my skills as an engineer and producer. And the process of going to school for that, I was like, man, I love this. I love turning knobs and making records. And I was doing this process to 2-inch tape. This is right when Pro Tools hadn't fully come into play yet.
Mm-hmm.
So I was doing records the old way, which was the true art of it.
Yeah.
And I did that, and I did really, really well. And I was like, wow, this is what I want to do for a living. So I came to New York City and interned at a recording studio and got an opportunity. Somebody gave me a job at a recording studio, and I was like a runner and an intern and cleaning floors with a toothbrush and like all these classic music industry entry point type of jobs, right? And I worked my way up there pretty quickly. And as I was working my way up and actually doing the work of engineering and producing professionally, I was like, I don't think this is for me. And I think it happens to a lot of people where they go to school for something and they go, well, now that I've gone through the schooling, I'm not sure it's for me. or
Right.
they go to the schooling and they think it's for them. And once they get into professional life, they find out it's very different from school.
Yes.
So I loved engineering and producing in school.
Yeah.
And I liked it professionally, but I didn't love it. I wasn't one of those people who was going to be a super gearhead and spend the rest of my life in isolation in a studio, you know. And it was also, when I came into that side of the business, it was a very different one than it is now. It's a kinder place to grow now. When I came in, it was very cutthroat.
Gotcha.
And most of the top engineers and producers I worked with were unhealthy, unhappy, and divorced. So I was like, I don't think that that's probably the route for me.
Yeah.
So I eyes open, and I found myself landing in the role of studio manager, which was much more conducive to my skill set. I kind of was the host of the studio.
That makes sense. You're such a people person to me. You know, you seem to be good at you're like a naturally warm person. So that makes sense.
Well, thank you. But like, so that my hospitality background kind of prepared me for that.
Yeah.
Kind of playing host to strangers. So that was a nice fit for me. Plus I got to kind of control the studio hours, and I got to make all the relationships with labels and producers and all kinds of people like that. So it started to build my network. It had steady hours also, which was nice.
Yeah.
With health insurance involved. So like I had kind of landed myself in a steady job in the music industry, which was odd.
Yeah.
But so I found, kind of to come full circle on that, I found myself working in the music industry, which I didn't love in school. But when I started to do it professionally, I'm like, actually, I love this.
Yeah.
So, and then I like every New Yorker does, you have like 5 side hustles on top of your regular job. So I was always building things with friends and colleagues, and ultimately I met my current business partner actually through Craigslist, and we started doing things together, producing together. We built a little record label together, kind of naively, and then fell into publicity. And now that's what I do. I run a publicity agency.
Right.
That works with artists from everywhere. Yeah. So that's kind of my path. I never thought I'd end up in PR, but because I didn't really know anything about that kind of coming up. But
yeah,
my role is really to guide artists and take care of them, which has never really changed. That was the same even when I was engineering. It was always the same. It was guiding them sonically or whatever it may be. So now I kind of guide them through like the marketing process and the publicity side.
Awesome.
Then of course I do consulting and business development and all of that kind of thing, right? So that's kind of my career path. I didn't expect to end up here, and I don't know where I'll end up later. You know, it's like a constant evolving thing. In terms of why I do it, and this is what you were alluding to before, you know, my father was a priest before he left the priesthood and ultimately met my mother. So that part of his life, he was a spiritual guide. Okay? And oftentimes that guidance had very little to do with faith. I mean, it's when later in his life, he was in education. He was in the world of education and conflict resolution. So he was a peacemaker, and he would also help students and guide them when they were lost academically. And a lot of that guidance probably had little to do with school, and it was probably a more personal guidance to kind of get it back on track academically. Yeah. So I grew up in this kind of culture of hustle, like entrepreneurial hustle. Yeah. On like my mother's side, and my father's side was more of this like introspective,
encouraging,
guiding. Yeah, guiding people. Yeah. And that was kind of the tone that I grew up in. So I think I just absorbed that way of operating, and that felt more comfortable to me, because I was someone who was a bit introverted, to say the least, when I was young. Yeah. So kind of internalized everything. So that's really one of the core reasons of why I do it. I feel like I'm doing that work that he was doing. I just do it through music. I guide artists. Yeah. Right. And sometimes my guidance on the creative side, or my guidance for an artist in their career, has nothing to do with music.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, sometimes the answer has nothing to do with
It doesn't
what
have
they
to do with
are,
music for sure. Yeah.
what they're doing or not doing in terms of the music industry, so to speak. Sometimes it has very little to do with that.
Right. And
So
a majority of the best advice that has gotten me through the hardest times of my career had nothing to do with music. It was the internal blocks, it was the internal
that's right.
facts, you know?
And that's right. Exactly. So that's part of the reason, one of the deeper reasons I do it. It keeps me connected to him and his work. And he had a really wide impact on people that way. So that's something that I'd like to keep going.
Yeah. So tell me about the compass method then.
Right. So this is I call it like, it's a prescriptive simplification for artists, right? Who are going through this as a career and trying to have a life as an artist. I've been paying attention to artists since I was a teenager in bands. I mean, I've been paying attention to the mindset of an artist, or certainly the pain points. The pain points are no different in someone like you. Mm-hmm. They're the same in the people who are just starting out. Mm-hmm. They're the same if I sit down with a multi-time Grammy winner at the height of their career. They're the same pain points as the person who's never put out a song and who's shy about it.
Yeah.
Right. Some of the central things that are blockages or problems or areas of concern for artists don't change depending on where you are in the business or how far you've come.
I love
right?
that.
And I kind of noticed this throughout my career. I'm like, wow, you know, it's the same. It doesn't even matter who I talk to at what point in their career, they have similar issues. So, you know, artists and music has been everything for me. It's saved me many times over. So I'm sure it has you, right? Mm-hmm. And anybody probably watching or listening to this podcast probably felt the same. It's like music is that central soundtrack to the life, right?
Yes.
So for me, this method ended up being a method that I used to coach and consult for artists, where I focus less on outcomes and more on foundational systems.
Okay.
And I'm very rigorous in the discipline of articulation of whatever it is that we're trying to do.
I love that.
And so that's there's a methodology that I've developed around that. Okay, so that's like it's the mechanism I use to lead any kind of consulting or development that I do. But the purpose of me doing it and developing was really to give back, because like artists have, I mean, they've just been everything. They lead my entire existence. Like when I wake up, and one of the first things I'll do is if I'm going to meditate or whatever it may be, it's music has got to come first. Or if I'm working, I need to get into a zone. That's what's going to come and lead it for me. It's going to put me in a certain mindset. So it's my way of developing a systems-based way of having an experience as an artist that relieves some pressure. Mm-hmm. And it's a way for me to get back to artists. So that's why I'm doing it. And we'll talk about it, but I'm going to be putting it out in book form. And it's going to be very much that. It's going to be very much take some pressure off and provide a little bit of relief and a different way of talking to artists than is typical of what's out there.
There's a great book, I'm sure you're familiar with, Stephen Pressfield, called The Artist's Journey. It's his most recent book.
Yes.
And he has a theory that I didn't realize it until I read this book, but it's every artist goes through first the hero's journey, and then they step into their artist's journey. Meaning, like, for me, that was going through all these, tumultuous relationships and, addiction and all this stuff. And then the day I decided to get sober and write every single day, that's when my artist journey began. That doesn't mean things get easier. It doesn't mean like this big aha moment happens and it's all clear, crystal clear. Like there are still huge ups and downs, but like, would you say that you would agree with that kind of idea of like, as human beings, we go through an artist journey to get to the artist journey?
It's an interesting way of framing it.
Yeah.
I'm always hesitant to give one perspective or one piece of advice to kind of encapsulate everybody, because everybody is so unique. And whatever advice that I give an artist there will be examples out there of the opposite. Like there are outliers to almost anything you could suggest or say is common or whatever.
Right.
I definitely think that you go on some sort of a journey. I think for everybody, it can be a little bit different. You know, there can be the people who come up and kind of explode and are internationally famous at 17, and that's a much different journey than the more common journey, which is you kind of have your breakout moment or your scalable moment, so to speak, 13, 15 years in. Like that's way more common. That's way more common.
Right, because this whole podcast is about that. What you just said, it's like the working artist. It's not about the superstars, and it's not about the beginners necessarily. This is for like middle class musicians, so to speak. That's the best way I can articulate that, is like people are in the process of working towards that big moment.
Yeah, and you know, it's a really interesting conversation to have. I love talking about this whole area here. Because I'm not sure you ever fully arrive somewhere.
True.
I've talked to artists who have like markers that most artists would kill for. You know, they've won a Grammy. They've got 100 million streams cumulatively per year on Spotify.
Yeah.
They've toured internationally and sold out tours. They make a living off of music and don't do anything else and have total freedom. You'd be like, oh man, sign me up for any of those, right? Yeah. But those artists are still on a journey too.
Right. Yeah.
And it doesn't mean that they're happy. It doesn't mean that they feel that's successful. It just really depends. So to go back to your previous question there, a lot of my work is removing those outcomes. I feel like those outcomes aren't your choice, and you don't get to decide when or if they happen.
Yeah.
It's totally out of your control. So if you can move aside from the outcomes and just focus on your systems and the way that you operate and your own development, the outcomes kind of take care of themselves.
So true.
And
true.
It's an easier way to exist as a creative than to be like, I need to have that, or I need to have that, or I need to have that.
I cannot, you're like preaching, like the whole idea of focusing on just writing a song a day. That's one thing that's in my control, and it will naturally develop these outcomes that I would love, you know?
Oh my gosh. I mean, the natural byproduct of your process is you're going to end up with an enormous catalog, right?
Yeah.
And for a songwriter, your catalog is your leverage. So the outcome of that will take care of itself. And you don't know when or how, but it will.
Yeah.
Right. So you focus on your process, and if that's what you can control, and if you make that your priority, you'll have a much better experience than chasing the outcomes.
I would love to hear your perspective on my favorite question that I've asked all the guests on the show.
Okay.
When you wanted to give up as an artist, what made you keep going? And what is the advice that you give to artists who are at their wits' end, want to quit? Like, how do you frame that?
I love this one even more than the other question.
It's a juicy one.
And I don't let artists off the hook on this one, because we've all been there, right? And the very first thing that I do when I find an artist in this space is I go right into it and get really specific into what does that's just a feeling. I want to quit, right? It's a feeling. It's not real. It's not something tangible you can touch. So it's a feeling. So I get right into where it comes from and what's like the source of it. Okay. And it's usually one of a few things. It's usually a mismatch between expectations and outcomes. Right?
Yeah.
Or it's a partial or entire disconnect from your purpose and why you're doing it.
Yes.
Right? It can be things like that.
Absolutely.
Or you're chasing the wrong thing. Right? A lot of artists that have like burnt out, it's because they expected something to happen.
Yeah.
And what happened didn't match that expectation, right? So you start with that one. So I'll drill down into that and get into what the expectation actually was.
Yeah.
And try to look at it almost surgically like that, and try to pull some of the emotion out of it.
Yeah.
So we can get to the source of what caused the feeling.
I love
and then
that.
if you can identify the source of it, then you treat the source.
Yes.
Because then if it's like, oh, I'm just totally disconnected from why I'm doing it. Like, I do know an artist has an enormous amount of streams, and you'd think, wow,
happy.
he's doing it, but that person wanted to quit too.
Yeah.
Even in that moment. So it had nothing to do with that, a metric or a number or an outcome.
Yes.
But she thought it would.
Right. It's like they may have gotten their goal, but they don't feel the way they thought they would once they reach that goal.
Right. And so that's what it is. So it's about identifying that. That's the source of the feeling.
Mm-hmm.
So when you do that, it takes some of the pressure off of this, like, oh my God, I've got to quit. I have to quit the thing that's most important to me. You don't. You just have to maybe align those two now that are mismatched. You have to match them.
Yeah. I love that.
These are all just problems to solve. And if you tackle them a certain way and remove the kind of the emotional charge out of it, or remove that from leading the conversation around quitting,
Mm-hmm.
It's easier to tackle.
Yeah.
There's nothing wrong with quitting, but I don't think you quit music. Like, music chooses you. It's not the other way around.
So true. It's a calling. It's not a career. I don't even like the word career. I keep saying it, but that's not the right word.
It's a calling. It doesn't even matter if you go do something else as your job.
Right.
The thing that's driving your life is you want to perform, or you want to write, or you want to just create. You want to bring something to life that's only in your head, and you want to hear it come out of a speaker.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you don't quit that. You almost can't.
It's so true.
You want to quit. You want to quit the expectations that aren't being met. That's what you want to quit.
Yeah.
So this is kind of how I approach that. I get into that, and
that's amazing. I really love
it. It makes you kind of use different language around it.
Yeah.
And that's the key to kind of everything.
There's another kind of neutralizing advice that Seth Godin has written about. I love Seth Godin. And it's be famous to the family instead of trying to be this mega superstar. Be famous to the family of your specific niche in the world who get the soul of what you're trying to do. And if they don't get the soul of what you're trying to do, then they just simply didn't belong in your family. It's really that neutral. Like, that is the most amazing way to think about it, I feel like.
Yeah, it's a good way to think about it. That frames it in a much more palatable way, for sure. Mm-hmm. I like that too. Okay, cool.
Hey, I hope y'all are enjoying the episode so far. Really quick before we continue, I see these episodes as a form of priceless mentorship, and that's something I always wished I had in my own journey. If you also feel you are getting something of value from these conversations from veteran working artists, there is a way to support the show and keep it going. For just $3 a month, you can become a personal patron to the podcast by joining over at patreon.com/Grace Askew. Or if you'd like to be a one-time supporter, you can name your price and throw in what you'd like to the virtual tip jar at paypal.me/Grace Askew. Either way, your listenership means so much to me. All right, let's get back to the show. Well, I tend to see social media as like a powerful way to cut out the middleman and rendering the artist certainly way more powerful. And record labels, to me, are getting more and more useless as the years pass. What is your perspective on the current stance and the future stance of record labels?
It's very important to understand what a record label is and what it isn't. And this is another issue where artists kind of get in trouble. They think it's one thing when it's not. Okay. The way I look at record labels is they are access to scale. Okay, here's an analogy. You make your own product, you sell it on Etsy. You don't need a record label to do. You don't need someone else to do that, and you can make a living from it. Mm-hmm. And you can make good money from it, and you can have loyal customers. But it isn't the same as having your product in Target.
True.
Okay, so it's not the same. So record labels are access to scale. They can do things at a scale that an individual can't, right? Like, I'll give you a general example of this. Like when my company works with a major label artist who has 200 people working on the global team and spends $250,000 on a single, that's a scale that you can't compete with, right? So you aren't on a level playing field when it comes to that.
Yeah, true.
So that's important to know. It's on another scale, and it is about scaling to mass. If you are an artist who makes music that isn't for the masses, which most music isn't,
yeah, it shouldn't be, at least.
then that's okay. You don't really need that kind of scale. Or if that's the game you're playing, to have that kind of scale, you probably will need to go that route at some point.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Now, how you get there could be very unique. Like you can, in today's world, or certainly in the future, I think it will keep going this way. There, with virality, when things go viral,
yes,
that is the scale. And then the record labels can come to you because they can add more scale to that, right?
Yeah.
There's proof of scale, so it's a safer bet for them. So you can be on a record label that direction, or you can come a different direction. But I do think if your ambitions are to be the biggest artist in the world, you probably aren't going to choose the path of releasing your stuff only on Bandcamp.
True.
You know, it's like, so you have to kind of match your actions to your ambitions. So if you don't care about record labels and you just want to build a real authentic audience and build that in a way that feels good and without a middleman, social media is a great tool for that. And you can kind of bypass the record label to do that type of work and build something really cool there without them.
Yeah, and hopefully become a profitable brand on your own.
You can. I know plenty of artists who are profitable and do well and make music only for a living, and they don't have a record label and they're not interested in one, and no record labels are coming knocking.
Yeah.
And it's totally okay. I think you have to avoid the temptation to demonize record labels, even though there's valid reasons to historically. But if you do, you got to be careful that you aren't using that demonization as a way to get yourself off the hook or something. But you also have to understand its role, and if its role is for you, then maybe you want to pursue that route. But it's also something you can't control. Yeah. So
absolutely,
you don't go shopping for them.
Yeah.
Right. They either come to you, or it's a combination of ways that can happen. But you focus on your own thing. But I don't know what their future is going to be. I mean, they're very powerful corporations with really smart people working there too.
Yeah.
And I think they'll remain in the picture. They'll just bend and move, or try to control the market as best they can, or move with it as things change. But as we've seen recently too, entire industries can be shaken overnight by something really disruptive. So who knows what's coming in the future in that regard.
Yeah, absolutely. I had another question kind of about that social media world. I mean, does age matter anymore in this much more democratic influencer world for musicians? I mean, stardom, I feel like back in the early 2000s had like an age cap, like 23. You know what I'm saying? Like pop stars were the thing.
It did. You know, when I was first coming into the business, ageism was a real thing, for sure. I was working with a young independent artist, and I met an A&R and pitched it. They'd probably be like, "Oh, how old is she?" You know, it'd be like an early question, right?
Yeah.
I don't. The short answer is no. I don't think it makes any difference anymore. But like a couple of years ago, when Sia had like the #1 song, and she's a 40-year-old, woman. Like that was a big indicator that it didn't matter.
Right.
Little kids loved Chandelier. Teenagers loved Chandelier. Like everybody loved that song, and the song transcended age. It didn't matter.
Yeah.
It didn't have to be a 20-year-old for everybody to go, "Oh, that's good. I like it."
Right. Yeah. That's kind of the way I'm seeing it as well. It's hope.
Yeah. Well, I also look at it like this. again, it depends what you're chasing. If
Yeah.
you're a 50-year-old man trying to make music that's going to appeal to a 13-year-old, it's probably, ageism is probably going to be an obstacle for you. It probably isn't going to work. It's not a great idea.
Yeah.
So it's an extreme example, but you have to just understand it. Like you have to understand the age demographic that consumes your style of music that you're making. And it goes back to your point of become famous for the family, become someone for the ideal demographic before you start trying to get people outside of that.
Yeah.
Because your music's not for everybody, and that's not a slight, it's just the truth. Most music is niche.
Yeah, I like that perspective.
Yeah.
What would you say is the best advice you've heard someone else give an artist?
I haven't heard too much, to be honest. Kind of historically, advice to artists has been a little condescending in tone, or it's all about tactical advice, or you need to do this, or you need to build a following, or
it's like stress-inducing, overwhelming. That's I mean,
totally. You need to get your numbers up, whatever that means, right? That kind of advice of like, you're not doing enough.
Yes.
As if an artist doesn't have enough to do.
Yeah.
You're not doing enough. You're not good enough. You need to do X, Y, Z. You shouldn't be doing X, Y, Z. It's like this, the tonality of most advice over the years from what I've seen has just been like this, or it's been too vague. like every artist needs to do all these things, and it's not true at all.
Yeah.
Right. So I don't know. I had read a quote, and another writer passed it to me recently. So this wasn't advice for an artist, but it applies. It was like, to become to write a great book, you need to become the book.
Mm-hmm.
And I kind of took that across the board for creative people, right? To make anything great, you have to become it.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
And I think that advice is really good for artists, because it's at the core of who you are too. It's like to be a great writer, or to write that great song, you need to become that writer. You need to become that writer that writes every day for a whole year.
Yeah.
Right. Or for you, with your kind of your world and your brand, you need to become it.
Yeah.
And live it.
Yes.
For it to really resonate with people. You're not living in Brooklyn posting pictures of tumbleweed that you find on the internet. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You're like living it. These are places you go and you live and you write in. That's why your whole world that you're creating is like so authentic. It's who you are.
Mm-hmm.
You walk the walk, you talk the talk. This is your home. This is your life.
Yeah.
So I think for artists, some advice there, you could take it like that. And
I like that a lot. Artists create
to become it.
It's not like Tom Waits was born Tom Waits. He created Tom Waits. You know what I mean? There was a girl that wanted to do consult with me, and she was like, I really want to get into pop music and be a pop singer or star. And does that mean I start have to, posting myself in these pop outfits and just I'm like, well, kind of, yeah. Like, you need to envelop whatever you want to become, exactly what you're saying.
Right. Yeah. It's kind of like, and you can take it however you need it to work for you. It can just be like, that can mean to just fully commit to something, right? Either an aesthetic or a sound or a lifestyle.
Mm-hmm.
But it is that kind of, you have to become it fully.
Yeah.
Right. And doing that gives you access to the potential to make something really great.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure that you can without that kind of commitment to be it and not just think about it or dabble in it.
I love that so much. Is that your advice that you would say you would give to an artist asking, how can I have longevity in my career? I mean, I would say that's probably the top way to do that, is like, it has to be authentic.
Sure. Well, longevity. Okay. Here's my answer for longevity. it goes back to early part of our conversation too. It's like, get rid of outcomes as the thing that you're chasing. Like, I'm chasing verification on a social platform. I'm chasing 1 million followers. I'm chasing a record label. I'm chasing a certain amount of money. I'm chasing a certain type of fame. Stop chasing outcomes. If you want to have a long career, start articulating what the evolutions of yourself are going to look like, right? Like, what's the next evolution for you as a writer, a creative, an artist, a songwriter, whatever it may be. Start to think about what the next evolutionary version of yourself is without skipping a step.
Yeah.
Figure out how to articulate it, and then only to chase that.
Yes. Preach.
Right. And then when you're there, focus on the next evolution.
So true.
And only chase that, because you will always be evolving your whole life.
Yes.
You know, the core might stay similar. The core that keeps you grounded, or the why might stay relatively in the same spot.
Yeah.
But how you form, like, in your priorities around that, and how you view things will shift and evolve over time.
Yes.
So if you focus on those evolutions, then you're always chasing the right thing. You're always chasing an improved version of yourself, or a refined version, or something like that. So that's how I push people towards longevity.
Yeah.
And for you, it's like you're almost creating a lifestyle brand, right? Which, like, when I see you and see what you're doing, I'm like, wow, that could evolve into a clothing company. That could evolve into.
We're working on it.
Right. That could evolve into that. I could totally see that as an evolution for you as a creative individual. Right. And the music is always going to intertwine in there.
Yeah, no, artists, I think, made the mistake of not thinking of themselves as a brand, but we are a brand. I am a walking brand. Everything I do, say, the way I live, the way I dress, the way I talk is my brand.
Right.
And I think artists need to understand that,
Right. And there's all different, I mean, we could get into a long conversation about branding, but yes, and ultimately that's it. But I would also say, just be open, let those evolutions let your mind be open to what they could be.
Yeah.
I never thought I would be here doing what I'm doing. That the 13-year-old self of me would never be comfortable enough to do this. Right. So you never know where you're going to go, and you have to be really open to how it could evolve. And you also need to do it unapologetically, without anybody's permission or caring what someone else thinks about it. You have to be willing to follow that muse a little bit and see where it leads you. It can lead you to somewhere you never thought you'd be, but could be an amazing place to land.
Yeah. And even being not so afraid or resistant to genre and naming and claiming a genre, because I think we all need to fit within a box in the beginning. And then we can, as we evolve, like you're saying, we can kind of get to the edges of it and evolve into something different. I've been resistant to calling my music country, for example, but I'm getting more open-minded to just calling myself a country artist, because that clarifies it for my brand. It clarifies it for my audience. So that way it's like a stronger, tighter knit thing to market. Does that make sense?
Totally. It's so funny, because there's if somebody asked me about you and we're like, so what type of music does she make, or the first thing out of my mouth would be like outlaw country.
Yeah, I like that.
Because for me, you have a personal brand with an outlaw sub archetype. That's how I view your project. So
cool.
Whatever you do, whatever feels right for you in terms of framing things. Audiences and consumers are sophisticated. We don't need to dumb down for us either. We can.
Right, and that's not dumbing it down. Yeah. Totally.
But whatever makes it really clear and concise for you is always helpful.
Yeah. So looking into the future for you, tell us more about this book.
Okay, so it's a bit of what I've said before, but it'll take the form of a book. And for me, this is a way to scale my method and way of working with artists beyond, talking to someone for an hour over Skype. You can't scale that. So I can reach more artists and give them this perspective at a larger scale by putting it in a book form. And I love books. I'm a sucker for physical products too. And you'll see with this book, it comes out, it's got a very outdoorsy theme to it.
Cool.
Which is on brand for me. I love the outdoors, love the hike. I love
how this method works.
That's right. I love like being in the woods, and this has been a place where I've always gone to get clear on things in my life is in the woods.
Mm-hmm.
So it definitely has that kind of a feel to it. There's a lot of analogies and symbolism in there that is related to nature and things like that. So
is there a release date or?
Say again?
Is there a release date set yet or?
No, I've been working on this for about 5 years.
Wow.
Like I wrote the book entirely and then scrapped it.
Oh man.
So I wrote it, and this is, I think, a good lesson for artists too. I wrote it trying to sound like someone writing a book about this, right? Rather than it being my voice. And when I got done with it, I'm like, wow, that doesn't sound like me, and that's not right. So I reapproached it from a place of it in my own voice. Mm-hmm. So, and writing a book is kind of like a birthing process. It's painful, and it's like songs. The early versions suck, and you lose perspective on the work sometimes. But just like a song, sometimes it takes a while and it kind of forms itself.
Yeah.
So for me, this book will be done when it's done. The idea is to finish it this year.
Yeah.
If I do, awesome. If I don't, that's okay too. For me, I'm probably not going to write another one. So I just want to make sure that this one feels right to me. And the process of writing it has made me change my mind on some things. So I've rewritten some parts, and
they're just stuck, as we like to say.
Yeah. So it'll come probably within the next year. But that's really what it is. It'll be a book form of my perspectives, and hopefully that will be able to reach a lot of artists.
Well, artists can follow your blog, right? And on your website?
They can.
Nice.
Yeah. So the site is thecompass-method.com. And then I'm also under the Compass Method on Medium, which is my preferred blogging platform there.
Yeah, I'll link those below for the podcast listeners who are interested in reading your articles. We'll have a website below.
Yeah, a lot of free advice there, and very much the tone and the spirit of the book. So it'll give you a good indication of what's to come in that way.
Well, I am so grateful for your wisdom and for your time. I know our listeners.
Thank you, Grace.
Just a short amount of time. It's just been amazing.
Awesome. Yeah, we were concise on that one. We got right to it. Awesome.
Right.
I very much appreciate you including me in season 1. This is a really good medium for you
to
do.
That.
So I'm excited to see how season 2 evolves from season 1. So
yeah, me too.
Let's go, Grace.
Awesome. Well, I'll talk to you soon. Thank you so much.
All right, my friend. We'll talk soon. Be well.
Well, that's a wrap, y'all. To see our full conversation, you can go to youtube.com/Grace Askew. You can also go to the Grace Askew Spotify page to enjoy a fully curated playlist for each week's episode. And y'all, don't be scared to slide on into my DMs on Instagram with any questions, comments, or insights you'd like to share. Thanks for listening to Daring to Suck. I'll see y'all next Monday for another fresh episode.